Iowa Learning Farms and Practical Farmers of Iowa partnered together in 2008 to examine the effect of winter cereal rye on cash crop yields and soil. Since then, this unique project has grown into multiple research projects examining cover crop economics and new soil health measurement tools. To date, it is one of the longest on-farm cover crop demonstration projects in Iowa. We want to thank all of the farmer partners who participated in this project, especially those that helped us reach 10 years. Jim Funke of Jefferson, Rick Jukums of Plainfield, Rob Stout of Westchester, Kelly Tobin of Newmarket, and White Rock Conservancy of Coon Rapids. This project was made possible through support from the following organizations. Farmers reported that in 63 out of the 70 site years, properly managed cover crops had little to no negative effect on their corn or soybean yields, and it actually increased soybean yields in 10 site years and corn in 3 site years. These demonstration sites have spawned multiple additional projects to examine the soil's response to cover crops. Iowa Learning Farms and Practical Farmers of Iowa's staff and interns have collected data on water infiltration, bulk density, total carbon, total nitrogen, and pH, as well as conducted the Haney Soil Health Test. And what we have concluded is that changes take time. Similar cover crop studies indicate that soil changes take years to become noticeable or significant. Taking a closer look at soil biology, Dr. Marshall McDaniel's lab from ISU Agronomy led a study using tea bags to measure the microbial activity in the soil. Similarly, earthworm midden counts from these sites and similar cover crop sites showed a 40% increase in earthworm populations when there was a cereal rye cover crop present. Lastly, the cost of soil erosion to the landowner was explored, and for each ton of soil that is kept in place through conservation practices like cover crops, just over $6 can be credited to that practice in offsetting the cost of implementation.
Good morning, I'm Rick Jukums in Plainfield, Iowa. I farm in Butler and Bramer County in northeast Iowa. I started with the Iowa Learning Farms project for cover crops on strip plans 12 years ago, and we did it for 10 years, and after 10 years I was tired of the strips being not covered, so I went to 100% cover crops. We fly on oats and radishes on our soybean ground, and we put on rye and radishes on our corn ground. We measured from the road down, and we gave it that starting point, so we just kept them in the same spot every time. We just used the measurements from the road. We seeded right after harvest. When we first started, we were still chopping silage, so we'd go out with a regular old John Deere Van Brunt drill and drilled it in. And then after a few years, we went out with a no-till drill. And then the last couple years, we went back to just a little old Van Brunt 12-foot drill and drilled in our rye right in the standing corn stalks and in the soybean stubble. What's different after being in cover crops for 12 years? The soil is soft. I don't know how you'd say it. It's softer in the foot. There's more organic matter in the soil. The infiltration is a lot better. Weed pressure isn't near as much where I have cover crops growing. There's just a lot of benefits from cover crops that after 5-6 years you'll start to see, but it takes that long to get things going in the right direction. You've got to start growing all the bacteria and fungi and the earthworms in the soil to help break down the soil as you're using it. I think that my soils are more adapt to weather change. I think there's more resiliency in my soil. I don't know that it's a balancing act. It's just something I do. I mean, it's part of the farming system now. Once you're into it, you've got to stay into it. It's not like you can jump in and out all the time because you lose all the benefits of the cover that has been here. The change over 12 years has been, we used to import all our seed from South Dakota, and so we had to pay shipping, and it got to be a little more expensive than locally grown. So Yes, it's helped with the establishment of some cover crops that aren't as expensive. I have a neighbor that's actually set up a whole seed cleaning system, and he double crops rye and wheat in soybeans. And I also have another friend of mine south of me that grows oats that he takes them up there and gets them cleaned. So I just buy locally grown seed for cover. Well, working with landlords has been an interesting. They're all different. You come at them at all different angles. To put terraces on a rented farm, I put the bug in the landlord's ear and let him think about it for a while. And he came up to me probably about 6 months later and asked me how the terrace project was coming. And it says, I can get that started. So I guess another landlord had a hill that needed to be CRP, and I talked him into that. Another one had been having somebody else farm their ground for a while, and the first time I farmed it, we bounced through gullies that should have been waterways, and I talked to the owner and suggested that they put in CRP waterways, and that was done. So we put in 7 waterways in an 80-acre field. So I think if somebody would just talk to people, you can get the job done. It's not something you want to force on them. It's something that they have to make up their own mind that they're going to do. The reason I'm doing a lot of the conservation on my farm is because it's needed. We've got to protect our soils because they're one of our most precious resources. And we also got to protect the water that leaves our soils because it feeds and waters a lot of people on downstream. We started with prairie strips. Here by the house, we have a water retention basin that catches the water that runs off our living site. We've got filter strips on all our creeks behind us. We've got prairie strips across the road. We put in terraces on rented ground. We put in CRP waterways on rented ground. We just try and do the best we can to protect the water leaving our farm.
Hi, I'm George Schaefer. I am a farmer near Kelowna, Iowa. I farm with my brother Steve. We farm both conventionally and organically, and we also have a 150 cow herd of cattle. We make a lot of hay because of those cattle on our land. And I must say that the changes that my brother and I have seen over the 20 years we've been doing it is incredible. If I look back to what we were doing, actually even when we were doing that research project, to where we are now, we're in a whole different place now. The benefit of rye for weed control and the spraying. Rye starts growing in the spring and it gets big. Nothing can grow in there because that is such a thick mat of stuff that weeds will not grow in that. We plant green into everything, and so after we plant, to get our sprayers to do the job, they understand the timeliness because I'm in a county where a lot of people do it, and we've been doing it for a long time, and so they know what we need and they know what we're doing out here. And we have changed over time, and we make them aware of our changes, such as we didn't used to plant into green. We had them spray 7 and 10 days before planting in that system, and they knew they had to get out of here early and help us out with that, and they took care of that. When you plant corn, you have to manage nitrogen really intensely. You have to put nitrogen out there 3 or 4 times in the year. You can't just go out in the fall and put enough nitrogen out there to accommodate that. So, but once you get the management in the corn side down, it isn't that hard. Is it better that our county has a lot of people doing it? Clearly it's a lot better. A lot of the large operations have gone to 100% cover crops, and a lot of them are along highways, and people see it, and In the early spring, it's the first thing up and it's really green and lush and so everybody wants to know what are they doing out there. And there's a bit of, there's no stigma in this county about it. I mean, lots and lots of people do it. And like I said, a lot of the really large farmers do it. It's difficult to say, like I said before, that this is a long-term deal. And so I do think that in the long term, it will give me an advantage and stuff. Economically, does it give me an advantage? I don't know. I think I come out even, and I still am building the soil. I don't hurt myself with yield. And the soil is improving every year. And so if it's going to take a while, even 10 years will be little change. It'll take 20 to 50 years to really make effective change in the long run. But that's worth it. And as I said, when they start selling ground based upon the health of the soil and so forth, that will be the thing that will motivate a lot of people to move in that direction.
My name is Rob Stout. I farm in Washington County. We farm about 1,100 acres of corn and soybeans and feed out about 9,000 head of hogs. Yeah, I had never used cover crops till this long-term study started in the fall of 2009, I believe. I seeded my first cover crops. And the last 2 or 3 years, all I had was that wasn't in cover crops was the 10 acres of control strips. And now this year is my first year, I'm actually 100% cover crops in. First 3 years, actually, we flew on our cover crop seed with an airplane in like late August, early September, when the crop was still out in the field, like a brown silk for corn and first yellow leaf and soybeans, and that worked really good for a couple of years. We got great stands, and we thought that was a way to go because we got a head start on that fall growth versus planting the cover crops after harvest. But then we had a dry fall. It was dry didn't have rain for like 45 days after we flew on the seed, and we got hardly any growth on our rye that fall or the next spring. So we decided we had to do something different. So we bought a drill, and we've been drilling ever since. So we give up that early growth because we go in the field as soon as they harvest, but we always got a great stand, always got a perfect stand with the drill. So that's the trade-off, and we're willing to take that trade-off. Well, for one thing, they're just really good for soil erosion, keeping the soil in place. And we have about half of our ground is a little rolling, quite rolling, some of it. And so we found out with the heavy spring rains of around 2008 or 2009 that even though we'd been no-tilling for 35 years, that corn crop they were planting into last year's bean stubble, sometimes that bean stubble wasn't holding the ground in place. So we thought we needed to make the next step and add the cover crops, and we found that does a super job for erosion control. We've also found a lot of soil health benefits. We've found a lot more earthworms in where we've had the cover crops. Soil infiltration is better. Just the soil tilth, you can't see it maybe today when we've had 3 inches of rain the last 3 days, but normally it's just, you can stick your hand in there and it's loose, and you can see those earthworm middens there, and that's just something that we really like to see. There's more microbes working in the ground. We've done this teabag test with Iowa State, and they've found out that they're a lot more active, so they're doing the things we want the soil to do. I would make sure I had row openers to clean the soil ahead of the planting unit, and I'd have a seed firmer to make sure that seed is firmed in the slot nicely, and then I'd have closing wheels, and we use spiked closing wheels. We like the way that leaves the ground, and then we have a drag chain after it that kind of will scatter a little more residue around over the top of it, so we make sure if there's any slot open that it'll crumble some soil on top of that too. We also like to put on nitrogen with the planter. We've been using starters since we started no-tilling in 1983, but we added nitrogen to the starter as well as the starter on our planter after we started using cover crops. Well, if somebody's going to start using cover crops, find somebody in your neighborhood that's doing it successfully, or talk to somebody that's doing it successfully and get some tips from them. The easiest way to start is to start going into plant your beans into cover crop. It's kind of a no-brainer. I've never seen a yield drag planting beans into cover crop. Corn might take a couple of management changes, like making sure your nitrogen program is just up to snuff. But start with beans, start small, fly them on. If you don't have a drill, hire somebody to fly them on. You get started that way. It's an easy way to do it, and you can get started and see how it does. I'm committed. It's just part of my budget for crops. I put in that cost for the cover crop seed and for drilling it, just like I would herbicide or seed or fertilizer or anything else. It's just part of my normal year-to-year budget. I enjoy doing research with Iowa State and with other groups because I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I can always learn something. I don't claim to know it all, and if I can learn something, I'm glad to do it. So I learned the advantages of using cover crops, and that's been helpful to me. And so I'm hopefully Iowa Learning Farmer and practical farmers have learned something out of it too.